Welcome to Listen In Show, Community, Conversations, Connection. Today, I'm speaking with John Robinette, and I'm going to let John introduce himself.
Well, okay. I guess the easiest way is to say I'm a semi-retired IT professional. I now do leadership coaching, organizational development work at a local university, and also have a few other projects on the side, an online media company with my wife, Lori. I'm working on a book, a few other things.
Great, great. So John's been doing a lot of thinking about listening in since we began our conversation a month or so ago. And I'm going to start with the question I ask all of my guests. What does listening in mean to you, John?
What does listening in mean to me? Well, I think, we use words like mindfulness, or being present in the moment, and I think those are pretty accurate words, and it's a good place to start. And it's about a level of focus or attention to what's in front of you at the moment, regardless of what conversation you're having with yourself in your head about the to-do list or that thing that went wrong yesterday or that argument with your kid. Those things are constantly bouncing around in our head, and to develop an awareness that that's happening to the point where when we're having a meal, we're enjoying the meal, or when we're going for a walk in the park, we're enjoying the walk in the park, not working on a project in our head or what worry might be happening at that time.
And I know that many of us find it difficult to actually do that. That sounds easy. But
right.
What are some of the tools that you use to stay in the present moment?
Sure. And it is difficult, I think, for us as humans. It's difficult for me, right? I just said what I said as if I always walk in the park and pay attention to the park, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not true for me personally, right? It's a constant struggle, I think, for us as human beings. And part of it is because of the way we're wired, the way our brains are wired as human beings. And some of what I'm going to share, it comes from professional work and research that's come out of the area of neuroscience recently, actually, in the past 15, 20 years.
Right.
And understanding how our brains actually work and how we evolved from, primitive creatures to hunter-gatherers to modern humans. And we are literally wired as threat-seeking creatures. And our brains are wired for that purpose, and it served us quite well for many, many millions of years and helped us out of, the savannah and survive the threats that really did exist every day, just trying to get by. And now in our modern worlds, those threats, animals that used to be able to eat us or bad weather or, things like that, we're protected from them. Yet our brains are still oriented towards threat-seeking. And so we find threats all the time, whether they're true threats or not. And in the work I do and with my colleagues in the workplace, we have conversations with our clients about how you're in a meeting, somebody says something, it may be an innocent phrase or question or concern, yet oftentimes we will feel it. There's an emotion, there's a feeling, a body reaction to it as if it's a threat to our status or our position in the workplace.
And what does one do in that situation?
Well, one of the things we try to teach people or coach them on is to become aware of it, right? So awareness of that feeling. And in one bit of work we do, we'll talk about the shame affect. So if you're in a workplace and somebody questions a decision you make, right, and it may be in the spirit of trying to do a good job and however you need to work together, but many times we'll take that as a threat, right? We were wrong and the other person's right. And so that kind of whatever conversation we have in our head based on our past and our history influences how we interpret those types of things. And so the first thing to do is really to help people notice that happens, right? And so there's some practices and things we can do in the workplace I won't get into, but fundamentally as a human being, as an individual, it's to develop a way of understanding that it's normal to feel those feelings, those threats, that shame you might feel that somebody called you out as being wrong, and to not first react based on that.
Right.
Right. And so if we're working with a leader, a person in a leadership role, right, what we would coach them is that your decision-making ability actually becomes constrained when you're trying to make a decision from that threat response position. So I'm going into some more detail, but fundamentally, whether it's in the workplace or in your personal life, with a love relationship or your children, right, all the time, not all the time, but many times we get into conversations or these little power struggle type conflicts, whether it's trying to get the kid to clean up his room or your spouse didn't do something they said they would do or whatever it is. We turn those into threats, and then we respond from a threat position rather than one of more rational thinking. Right? And so some of the research also shows when when our bodies react to a threat, there's a literal physical response, right? Cortisol and adrenaline are pushed into your bloodstream. Our breathing becomes more rapid and shallow, right? Our heart rate increases, right? And so this is all gearing us up bodily for a fight or flight type response. And if you're in a relationship with another human being and they're challenging you on a decision you made about something in the workplace, if you're reacting from a fight or flight type place, the types of decisions you have access to in your pre-frontal cortex, right, our rational part of our brain, become constrained.
So if our brain has become constrained, our thinking has become slightly off skew or impaired, can our breath help us?
Right. So those types of practices we would associate with meditation or Buddhism or things like that are things that, regardless of how you contextualize, it doesn't have to be a Buddhist practice or a meditation practice, but just sitting for a moment, being aware that you're feeling some level of discomfort, right? However you label it, fear, threat, shame, doesn't matter, right? You're feeling discomfort, right? And that breathing practice can really help us set aside for the moment, right? And so you take that breath, and some people actually count, right? They'll breathe in for 5, hold it, and then breathe out for 7. Some of these types of things as a way to sort of focus in the moment.
Right.
And that breathing actually has a physical response to help counter what's just been going on with the adrenaline and cortisol and so on. And you're sort of short-circuiting your body's normal reaction to the shallow breathing and things like that. So, that would be one thing. And we actually, in one bit of work I do, we actually coach leaders on, before the meeting, maybe take a moment to just be present with yourself, maybe 30 seconds of deliberate breathing, intentional breathing, and then you can go into the meeting maybe with a clearer head and be more able to react or not be reactive in the moment if you're in a conflict-type meeting, right? These happen all the time.
Yeah, and certainly in personal relationships, too. If you're getting ready to speak with your partner or your child or your parent about something that you feel passionate about, it might be worthwhile to take a few moments to notice where you are and take some slow, deep breaths. And I've heard that, and you sort of mentioned this without saying it, that if you extend the out breath, that calms the nervous system. Is that what your work has shown? So, starting with a balanced breath, maybe 4 in, 4 out, get rid of the shallowness, and then start to extend the out breath can calm the nervous system. And also noticing where are you feeling the tension in your body, and perhaps breathing into that or moving into that. Moving that part of the body if you can. Yeah, those are some great tips. As a child, were you taught to listen in or to be aware of your feelings and your body sensations?
Not in that way. And I think part of it is the awareness we have is one that's more contemporary about this affect, if you will, right? Really in the past 20 years, I think, have some of these practices sort of moved into, I would say, mainstream, where they're acceptable. Like to even have this conversation in the workplace about, okay, before we go into this meeting, I want us to all sit quietly and have some intentional breathing, right? That's not a common or comfortable conversation most people have in the workplace, even today. Yet it's starting to become more conventional, right?
Certainly not in the 50s.
Right, and so, I'm 50 years old, so as a kid in the, 70s, these types of concepts didn't exist, so I wasn't taught them. Of course not. But there is some wisdom from, thinking about before you say, if you're angry, before you say something, count to 10. Right, and so that's something I think that is part of our cultural awareness that goes back pretty far, right? And so they may not have been thinking about intentional breathing as you count to 10 and how that calms the nervous system and things like that. We didn't know that, right? So those ideas weren't really accessible, I don't think, to us, except for maybe those who had started to look at, more Eastern religion and meditation and those types of practice, yoga as well. And yoga, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but
Sure.
Exercise, too, I think, is part of what helps condition the body to be able to handle those potential threats and stresses so we can actually physically be able to be more resilient, right? Resilience is another concept we'll talk about sometimes with clients, about the ability to handle a threat or an attack. I use the word attack as if it's a physical attack, but it doesn't have to be. It could be an emotional attack in the workplace or in a relationship, and to be able to take it and not let it damage you, right? And part of that is to understand where the attack came from and perhaps some empathy towards that person, right? And to give them how you interpret their action, or you can interpret it different ways, and the interpretation is your own. Right? So you can choose to interpret their action as they're out to get me, or you can interpret their action as one of their own fear or their own feelings of being threatened. Right? And so all those things sort of go together to create sort of a matrix, if you will, of you're asking about what tools or strategies, but all these things sort of together, I think, help us to bring an awareness towards what's going on in the moment so that we could be more effective in how we relate to other people.
And you're listening to WOWD LP Tacoma Park. And this is Listen In Show. I'm your host, Pam Holland, and today I'm talking with John Robinette. And we've been talking about, just now we were talking about resilience, but prior to that, John was sharing with us some really fascinating information that I've been hearing from a number of different sources about how we human beings are wired to sense danger. And we don't actually look for good things because in our, original lives as more primitive beings, looking for good things, there was no value in that, really. Correct?
Well, right. You think about if you want to put it in a cost-benefit type analysis, right? So if you're with your clan on the savannah, right, you may be able to go a little bit of time without food or water, right? But if there's a rival clan or a large creature that can eat you, hiding behind the bushes, you have to protect yourself from that threat, or you will die. Right. So the immediacy effect is important to consider. That a threat versus an opportunity, say, tends to be, or at least in that context, tends to be one that can cause significant damage quickly, as opposed to the more long-term opportunities that you would find by searching for water or food or whatever it is.
Right, gathering
so
berries.
Gathering berries. You may be hungry, you may not be comfortable, but you'll live.
Right.
Right.
So I wonder if what our gentle challenge might be for our listeners is to look for the positive. To look for the positive
Sure.
in every day. And I know that many people have benefited from having gratitude journals,
Mm-hmm.
gratitude practice, perhaps at the end of the day, looking for things that you're grateful for. Do you think that can help us to counteract this natural response?
Sure. There's actually also research, and if I can remember the name of the book, I think it's called The Buddha's Brain.
Okay.
And the author escapes me at the moment. But at some level, it is about sort of a positive orientation to the way you interpret the world around you, and that you can actually strengthen those neural pathways in your brain that are associated with a good thought or a good feeling as opposed to a negative thought or feeling.
But we
Right.
have to work exponentially
you have
hard
to work
at
it. That's right. So it doesn't come naturally or easy, right?
Right.
So it requires some effort to develop that. First, develop that practice, and a gratitude journal is a great way to do it. Noticing those good things that happen throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
This is anecdotal, but you think about your day, right? You have your to-do list of 20 items,
Right.
and you finish 19 out of 20, and you get home. What are you thinking about?
The one thing
You
do.
didn't finish,
Right.
Which is how we all have that experience, I think. And yet we don't give ourselves credit for the 19 or the 20 that we solved or finished.
Right.
And there's also in the marketing realm, you might come across literature that in terms of feedback, right? So especially now with all the online ratings that people have access to, whether it's Amazon or Yelp or these types of things.
Right.
A negative customer feedback will reach 20 times as many people as positive customer feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just oriented towards bad news, right?
Yes.
We look for bad news, and then we share bad news, right? It's just...
So we have to work really, really hard, folks. Really, really hard.
That's right.
So and this is a little bit of tangential, but when you spoke about the to-do list, also, I work with many people with this, and there's also things that we do throughout the day that were not even on the list,
Right.
that are very productive things,
Right.
that were really important things, perhaps very much more important than the things that were on our to-do list, but we still tend to focus on the fact that we really didn't get very far on our to-do list. So many people make a done list.
Mm-hmm.
And write down things, not just notice the things that they did on their to-do list, but write down all the things, like I spoke with my mom today.
Right.
That was not on my to-do list.
So add it and cross it off,
But that's
right?
really important. So you might consider that. You might consider these two things as your gentle challenge until our next show. And those are to consider a gratitude journal and making a done list at the end of each day. And giving yourself credit for all the things that you did. You took that phone call, you helped that friend out, you spoke with a friend who was really having a rough time. These are things you get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Can I
Sure.
a little bit on the to-do list?
Sure,
So
sure.
one coach I worked with, her approach and the group she worked with, you don't have a to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
You have a doing now list
Mm-hmm.
or a not doing now list,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what we tend to do with our to-do list, we write down everything we can think of that we need to do.
And then it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. And some of those things, if we just take another moment, we would realize I'm not actually going to get to this today.
Uh-huh.
And the intentional action is then once you've got these things that need accomplishing, you assign time to them in your schedule.
Yes.
You don't just have your list and then have all these meetings or whatever else you've got. You got to take the kids to soccer or whatever. You actually have to block time on your calendar to go to the bank or call the insurance company or whatever it is, right? And until you do that, you're not working on them. So they're on your not doing now list. It may still be important to do, but you have a separate list. So you don't ding yourself for not getting to that, because you intentionally said, here's the 6 things I have prioritized I'm going to get done today, and I've blocked time. I've put 15 minutes on my calendar to make that phone call. I've put 30 minutes on my calendar to run that errand, right? And then it takes it out of sort of the hopeful aspect of, I hope I get all these things done. It's now I have a deliberate strategy to accomplish this. And at the end of the day, you can look at it with a more honest interpretation of your effort and feel good about it, right? Which I think also helps to thinking about gratitude, feel gratitude. I got 5 of my 6 things on my doing now list. Something else came up that I wasn't expecting. Somebody got sick or whatever, right? And it's to be gentle on yourself too, right? It's like my interpretation of my work for the day was I got a lot of this stuff done. Something else crept in. I didn't get to it, and that's okay. I feel good about myself.
And I would also encourage people to know that things will creep in. I mean, when have you had a day when something didn't creep in that you didn't expect or perhaps want or make time for? I didn't make time for this. I don't have time for this.
That's right.
So I think John's suggestion about assigning times to the task that you wish to complete is incredibly important. And I also encourage people to pad those times. So, for example, if you think it's going to take you 15 minutes, write down 20 minutes.
That's right.
And then you have bonus time to breathe or have a cup of tea or begin your next task. And I also encourage people to, that's an estimated time, right? That is an estimated time.
Right. In my prior life as an IT project manager, I could spend hours talking to you about time estimation, and I won't. I'll just say this one thing is when we look at a task, we tend to choose an average. Right, we're making an estimation. We don't really know. We have a guess. Maybe it's based on history. Maybe it's not. But there's a 50% chance we're probably going to get it done on in that amount of time or not. Right, and so your notion of padding, I would use it a little differently. I would say give yourself a 95% confidence that you could finish it, rather than 50% confidence.
Okay, that's
so I would just thinking about it in sort of business terminology, right? So, how confident are you you're going to complete this? Maybe 50% is fine for a Saturday afternoon of raking leaves or something like that. Right. But other things, when your day's busy, you want a higher confidence.
Right. And also, I would encourage people to, particularly for repetitive tasks, to notice how much time things actually take. If you estimated that a particular task was going to take 20 minutes and, in fact, it took 45 minutes, make note of that. And then when you have to do that task or a similar task later on, you'll have a more realistic expectation of the time that something takes. And also, at the end of the day, when you're writing down your done list, you might write, I became more aware of how long things take today.
That's good. Right.
Yes, I was woefully wrong, but I became more aware of how long it actually takes to get to the grocery store during rush hour.
That's right. That's right.
So, some great tips. Thank you, John. Do you have any last thoughts about listening in or productivity? We've sort of merged into productivity here.
I think that my sort of parting thought, if that's the right term, is just know that you're a human being, know that your brain is wired a particular way, and don't beat yourself up for it, right? So this is just who we are, right? We can't there's certain parts of our brain and body we can't turn off, and be okay with that, right? And just become aware of your own personal idiosyncrasies around how you notice threats or however you want to call it in your day-to-day life, and just, that's interesting. This person at work said this thing that made me feel mad. I wonder I wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and maybe there's no answer, but just be aware of it, and then bring yourself back to the moment and continue on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned when we were talking before the show that you had somewhat reduced your intake of news and media at some point in your life. I don't know if that's something that you would still recommend or that you still practice.
Yes. Well,
don't stop listening to the radio.
Right. Obviously, you have to listen to this show all the time, right? I used to listen to radio all the time, public radio, different programs, and the news would always creep in every half hour. And so my wife died 6.5 years ago. And even before that, though, I was aware of how I would be sort of subjected to bad news, you know, bombings, murders, whatever it is. People don't tend to report on the news media all the happy things that are happening. That's not newsworthy. If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead, right, is what they say. Mm. And I stopped listening to public radio for a while. I still do. I mean, I can't say I don't. But I would tend to more classical music or even sports talk, right? If I need just like idle chatter if I'm driving, I would choose music or something like that, which I found I wouldn't get caught up in the story that they're telling, right? And it's not to be naive or ignorant of world events, right? I can still consume plenty of news
without
online or reading the newspaper, but then it becomes more intentional. I'm in control of when I'm going to read about what's going on in Syria, right? I'm not going to be listening to car talk reruns on a Sunday morning and then they break in for the news at the top of the hour and they're talking about Syria, right? That's not when I want that experience, right? And so it was a difficult choice, but I prefer to not have the radio just on, whether it's in the car or in the house. And my wife doesn't have the same view, so this is an area of conversation in our house. But we make, we all have earbuds and iPhones that can stream whatever, so.
Yeah. And, podcasts are an excellent choice.
They are, right.
I know that often if I'm not happy with what I'm hearing on the news, I just listen to an On Being podcast from Krista Tippett, and suddenly I feel like the world is good again.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much, John, for being here.
Thank you,
and
Pam,
again,
for
this
inviting me.
is WOWDLP. You've been listening to Listen In Show. We're here first and third Wednesday mornings from 8 to 8:30. And there's a lot of other awesome programming here on WOWD. Coming up today at 10 o'clock, we've got Borderlines with Bobby Hill. And not much going on Thursday. So if anybody's interested in doing some programming on Thursdays, let the folks here at WOWD know. And Tacoma Radio relies on your support. You can donate online at tacomaradio.org quickly and easily, or you can write a check payable to Historic Tacoma and send it to 7328 Carroll Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, 20912. And all of that information is available at tacomaradio.org. And you can find podcasts of this show at listeninshow.org. And thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to hearing from you on our Facebook page, on Twitter, the Listen In Show. You can find us on Facebook at Listen In Show TR. Thank you so much.